Hi, welcome to day 2 of the Growth Mentor Summit. I'm Matthew Eisner, and I'm here to talk to you about lean marketing analytics and how you can start using data to better build your business and have more efficient marketing tactics. So first today, we'll talk about why data is important. Then we'll talk about how you can apply data for your own business and your own marketing. We'll talk about how to start getting metrics and KPIs set up so that you can track your business growth and start to make improvements and adjustments where you see opportunities. We'll talk about how to get started with cohort analysis and segmentation so that you can understand what users are the most valuable to you, what product lines are the most valuable to you, and start to make decisions to focus efforts on those. We'll talk about what tools you're likely already using and ones that you might want to use in the future to be able to accomplish this. And we'll talk about common mistakes that people make when they're analyzing data and help you avoid making assumptions that could influence the output of your analysis. So first, how many of you have been in a scenario where two people are arguing back and forth in a boardroom or a meeting or anywhere else where you've thought to yourself, if I could answer XYZ question, I would be able to much better make a decision off of these two pieces of advice that I'm getting. Well, this is the value of data, and a lot of businesses actually already have this data internally being collected. They just don't know how to unlock it. And so we're going to talk today about how you can start unlocking that. But first, why is data actually so important? Well, there's a lot of very tangible use cases behind data, improving your operating revenue, reducing your operating cost, better understanding your audience and your customers. And then potentially once you've built kind of those basic capabilities, if you're looking to do something more disruptive, you can actually use data to discover opportunities that existing businesses have missed. You can actually sell your data outright to other businesses. And there's a few other opportunities that emerge once you have huge amounts of data or advanced machine learning, AI, neural network processing that can allow you to create data in more valuable ways. We're really going to focus more on the improving operating revenue, reducing operating costs, and especially understanding our audience. So how do you actually get started with data? Well, there's really 3 steps to any sort of data analysis pipeline. First, you need to actually capture data. It needs to be good data, and you need to be ensured that it's consistent across all of the different places that you're capturing it. Then you want to connect the data together because data on its own is not usually useful. If I know how many people use my product in a day, that is something that's nice to know. But if I know what channel they came from to use the product, what email drove them to use the product, that's something that's much more valuable and creates much more insight. And then from there, you can actually start to create reports, automation, and a lot of more advanced tactics off of the back of data. So we're really going to be talking mostly about the capture and connect, but there are certainly some talks on marketing automation, dashboarding, and other topics that would be worth checking out if those more create areas are interesting to you. So just at high level, there's something that's useful to keep in mind when we're talking about data. Effectively, at the top of this slide, you can see that there's a few different silos where we're likely capturing data. So you likely have a CRM system. You're likely using Google Analytics. You likely have a product database, or you're running ads, or have emails running. However, in all of these systems, they have data that's being captured independently. So usually you want some sort of tool that can connect them together. AWS Glue, Segment, Kaboola are some of the more advanced and very common tools that people use for that. One tool that you've likely heard of and could even potentially use is Zapier. So just something to keep in mind that you don't have to have a full-time engineer to be able to start connecting your data. You can actually often do it just with out-of-the-box connectors that exist between these platforms or tools like Zapier that give you a visual interface. From there, there's somewhere that you want to store the data. A lot of you are probably using AWS. Maybe some of you are using MS Azure or another hosting platform. But from there, you then want to send the data to various tools where you will create reports, create dashboards, trigger marketing and emails, or actually influence the product direction based off of the data that you're finding. So how specifically can you start applying data to your marketing? Well, the first way that I always start is by starting to pick what are the key metrics that I'm going to be tracking. And those metrics should be specific. It should be a very clear idea of what it is I'm tracking. It should not be number of people to the website. It should be number of new people to the website this month. They should be measurable. It should be something that you have a mechanism to actually report how many people did this. It should be attainable. So it's very easy to set lofty goals, but if you're not setting realistic goals, you're going to find that you're constantly either falling short or overperforming them. And it's much more difficult to actually start to get to a place where you can predict what's going to happen based off of what you've seen in the past. They should also be relevant. So most of the issues that I see with the growth hackers out there is that they're often driving metrics that don't really matter to a business. They're driving Instagram followers, or they're driving Facebook likes. Whereas really, if you're, for instance, a B2B SaaS company, you care about leads in your CRM, and you care about people who are actually signing up for your product and staying subscribed to it. So it's important to make sure that you're focusing on metrics that are actually important for your business and not just metrics that are growing. And they should also be time-based. If you don't have some sort of deadline to when you're going to hit these metrics, these goals will just go on and on and on, and you'll never actually cut off and say, okay, we didn't achieve the goal. How can we learn from this and try to in the future? So what can that actually allow you to do if you start to collect that data is you can start to realize, a business direction that we thought we wanted to go in isn't one that's really working for us. And a lot of companies have used this to see, well, actually our product's being used in a very different way than what we thought it was going to be used as. Or we see this market that's emerging and growing at a very fast rate, and we want to pivot to that. So good examples of that are YouTube realized after they had created a video dating platform that actually people were using it to host videos that weren't at all about dating. And so they pivoted to be a video hosting site instead. Flickr initially was a game, but realized that they had built such a good algorithm for storing photos that a lot of people started to just upload photos and share them through the game. And so they pivoted to that. There's a lot of other potential businesses that you can see here that have taken those types of strategic pivots based off of data they've started to collect as they brought a product to market. So I mentioned KPIs. What are KPIs? They're key performance indicators. They're a quantifiable set of metrics, hopefully SMART goals, but any sort of metric that you're taking stock of on a regular basis to make sure that you have some sort of measurement and objective count of what's happening in your business. This can be at most basic level, revenue, profit, costs. It can be at a more detailed level, the amount of users that come through specific channels to your website, the amount of users that perform a specific action in your app or software. But it's important to pick 5, 10 really important KPIs, and ideally one North Star KPI that's really what you're focused on as your biggest goal for the next period of time that's the most essential for your business so that you can start to improve and start to grow that. Another area in early data and how to start applying it to marketing is attribution. So similarly to the idea that we want to know what users came and did a specific action in the app, you also want to know where they came from. So attribution is the ability to assign actions to activities. And to have a full idea of how your business is working, how customers are flowing through your product, you want to be able to understand what channels are most valuable in terms of driving the most valuable actions. Because if you just know that we had 50 users from Facebook and 100 users from Twitter, potentially it looks like Twitter's a better channel for you. But if actually 25 of the Facebook users converted and 25 of the Twitter users converted, then potentially you realize that Facebook is actually a much more valuable channel because 4 times the amount of users actually end up converting. There are areas where attribution can be really difficult. So if you are trying to drive people to download a mobile app, if you have a brick and mortar sales experience or a really complex product, there's often a lot of data tooling that needs to happen on the product itself, or in the case of brick and mortar sales, often beacons set up in store that can actually allow you to have those types of attribution, and they can often be very costly. So something to keep in mind, but for basic web-based SaaS, other kind of web-based software, and even some native SaaS and other areas like that, attribution can generally be quite easy and something that even Google Analytics can allow you to do in a pretty deep way, which we'll get into pretty soon. So a little bit more about KPIs. What are some really common KPIs that a lot of businesses use? Well, we talked about profit, sales, cost of goods sold, qualified leads, whether sales qualified or marketing qualified, conversion rates, churn rates, are all very, very common metrics, especially even in accounting areas. Where some of my favorite metrics come in are customer acquisition cost, customer lifetime value, net promoter score. These are metrics that a lot of businesses use to be able to understand how effective is their marketing and how much can they invest in specific channels while they are still profitable. Another really interesting metric that I find is K-factor, which is effectively how many users a user will refer when they're onboarded to your platform. So a great example of this is Groupon realized that a certain segment of their users would onboard 4 other users if they decided to book a certain type of appointment. And so they basically drove all of their marketing at that type of user, and was something that was very efficient for them to scale because they were able to get 4 times the benefit out of the same marketing spend, because they realized that on average this user cohort was 4 times more effective. And we'll talk a little bit more about cohorts soon. So how do you make sure you're picking the right metrics for your business? You want them to be understandable, something that's well defined and clear enough that anyone in your business can look at it and understand why it's important and what it means. It should be comparative. So something that is looking at the price that a customer pays per usage, the value that a customer generates per download. These are all metrics that are not just looking in a single silo of your business, but are looking at how one part of your business relates to another. They should be relevant, obviously, as we mentioned with SMART goals, and they should be important. It should be something that you actually believe will improve your business's growth and standing, because if they're not, you can get very easily distracted by growing metrics that don't matter. So how do you actually measure metrics? Generally in a spreadsheet. So I've included a link to a Google Sheets file here that you can copy and use however you want. You can see I've set this up currently for web and social metrics. However, you could take it for email, you could take it for mobile apps. And really the idea is you just want rows of what the metric you're tracking is, and you want columns of a standardized period of time, whether it's months, weeks, bi-weeklies, quarterly. That's really up to you. You do want this to be something that you update on a regular basis, and you want to make sure that you're doing it in a consistent way. And what that really lends itself towards is the ability to see patterns in how your business performs. So if you notice that, I'm starting to post a lot more to Facebook, and I can see that in my metrics, and not just because it feels like I'm posting more to Facebook, and I see there's actually a significant impact on bottom line revenue, or there's not, that tells you potentially how worthwhile it is to keep investing in that channel. It also starts to let you have some pattern recognition around what's working and what's not, and the ability to start to predict a little bit better what is going to benefit growing your business. So you can see here I've included a template from Noah Kagan that he used in a blog post that basically, so he was the first head of growth at Facebook and started a company called SumoMe and AppSumo, which create a lot of MarTech tools and sell a lot of MarTech tools. But basically, when he looks at building out marketing, he really tries and predicts, what do I think the impact of these various activities is going to be based off of how high potential is there for traffic to come to the site, how relevant is that traffic going to likely be, and how many total people will result of that who will actually sign up for our product. So he used this in Mint to be able to try and reach 1 million users, and he did much faster than he was able to, than he expected to, because he effectively had figured out that these channels really seem like they're most valuable for me, and this is where I'm going to continue to invest most of my time. So how do we get started with cohort analysis? We talked a little bit about more metrics in general, but cohort analysis is something that allows for some really interesting comparative insight in a lot of businesses. So cohort analysis is, as by definition, a subset of behavioral analytics that takes data into a given data set and breaks them into various groups. So you could look at men and women. You could look at people by state. You could look at a number of other cohorts, and potentially what you'd find is some cohorts are more valuable for others and more worth your time, whether that's a specific industry that you're targeting your product towards, whether that's a specific age group or demographic group that finds more value in your product. Starting to collect data around cohorts and being able to split and analyze them allows you to make those discoveries that you might not know. So the way that I typically conduct cohort analysis is I map out all of the different channels or all of the different demographic groups or all of the different locations where I'm trying to find customers. Then I look at how much money I'm spending on those groups or how much activity those groups are creating, and then I divide them by each other. So I look at how many leads per dollar spent am I able to generate using social media, using partnerships, using emails. And this allows me to start to compare what the efficiency of each of those are. Now, it's not the whole picture because potentially social media has more potential for you to expand and reach new audiences than email does. However, it does at least give you a very clear idea that if I've been investing as much time as I have in these channels, which ones are actually paying back in the most efficient way. Another way to cohort users is by type. So are they using a specific type of device? Are they new or returning users? Is there demographic information that we potentially want to use? So really, how you cohort users is a factor of your imagination more than anything. And as I mentioned, you can also do by location, but there's a lot of different granularities in which you can cohort users by location. So worthwhile to think about, is it something where really I have users that speak specific languages, and what cohort of languages would I potentially want to target next? Is it something where my company is very based off of the interaction of people and needs local communities, and I want to find communities with particularly high amounts of schools or particularly high amounts of a certain type of shop? All of this you can find data on, and if you start to group the data and just take some basic numbers and counts of what's going on in that data set, you'll often find some very, very interesting insight that can allow you to make decisions that can massively benefit your business. So what tools do you actually need to be able to do this? Well, there's quite a few that you probably already have installed. So Google Analytics and Tag Manager is definitely the best tool for inbound marketing analytics for a website. They also have some tools for mobile apps, but particularly their website analytics tools are second to none. About 2/3 of the internet use them, and they have an incredible ability to detect where traffic is coming from. They're also just very powerful and generally very easy to use and set up. I'm not even a developer, and I can set up Google Analytics in 10 or 15 minutes. It might take a little bit longer the first time, but it really is just creating an account and copy and pasting a code into the right place on your website. Google Search Console is by far the best tool for at least Google SEO. If you're focused on Bing or Zandu or other search engines, then potentially you'd want to use some other webmaster tools. But if you're just looking to understand how people are finding your company through search, it's a very, very good tool, and also gives you some alerts and notifications if you're having issues with Google reading your site. You're also likely creating data in your email system. So most email systems record how many emails you send, who opens them and who doesn't, who clicks on emails and who doesn't. And so certainly you'd want to be taking this data and taking a deeper look at it than just how many people opened my last email, but actually say, okay, I wrote 3 emails this month, and one was written on Monday, one was written on Wednesday, and one was written on Friday. Was there some sort of difference in how people opened them? You also likely have some sort of internal database. Whether or not it's actually tracking user events, you would have to check with your technical team. But it's very, very powerful if it is, because what you can then do is correlate marketing activities to product actions. So just to keep in mind that you likely already have some pretty significant databases, but they're probably not being used for marketing functions. The last area that you likely are already using, and maybe don't even realize it, is called UTM, or your urgent tracking mechanisms. These are URL-based tags that allow you to see exactly what link a user clicked on. So basically you say that this link was in this email campaign sent on this day, and then you can see every single user who clicked on that link. So especially in tandem with Google Analytics, this is very powerful for being able to have better attribution, as we mentioned before. So as I mentioned, Google Analytics is a very powerful tool, but Google Tag Manager makes it even more powerful. So a lot of people will have Google Analytics set up and not Google Tag Manager. A lot will have them set up together, but I would highly, highly recommend setting up Google Tag Manager, especially if you're running ads, especially if you have advanced events on your site that aren't just visiting a thank you page as your conversion, but you want to see when someone clicks a button. Google Tag Manager is incredibly valuable for that. Branch is another tool that I think is really worth mentioning, specifically for mobile apps. So I mentioned it can be very difficult to see attribution from a user on a desktop into a mobile app download, and even just on a mobile device into a mobile app download. A lot of mobile software makes it very difficult to see where users came from before they downloaded something, because Apple wants to keep that data proprietary and Google wants to keep that data proprietary so they can charge you for advertising. Branch is an incredible tool for this and allows you to have very, very deep insight on how people navigate to pages in your app, not just from the app itself or the home screen, but from emails, from social media, and allows you to even personalize and detect, oh, this is this user, the last time they were in the app, they went to this place, and let's send them back there again. I also mentioned when we were talking about data connection, a tool called Segment. So this is a very, very useful tool to allow you to link different data systems together. So if you want to see which Facebook ads are driving the most email signups, and which Facebook ads are driving the least amount of users who churn. Segment can allow you, without very much code, to easily start to connect data systems together and be able to answer those questions that aren't just based off of what are people doing on our website, what are people doing in our mobile app, but how are people having a pattern from our website to our mobile app, and how can we start to understand that a little bit better. Kaboola is another similar tool, although it's a little bit less sandboxed. You probably need an engineer to be able to use this properly. But something to keep in mind if you find that Segment or kind of the basic click and point data connector tools aren't doing what you need, definitely worth thinking about something like Kaboola. Some more analytics side tools that are probably useful. So a lot of you have probably heard of Tableau. I personally think that's overkill, but it's a beautiful, beautiful data visualization tool. You could find something like Amazon QuickSight if you're on AWS, or Looker, or a number of other dashboarding tools that can allow you to have similar functionality, although certainly they aren't as pretty. A very, very simple version of that is called Gecko Board, which allows you to just have a few charts that live update from various places, and it's very easy to put together. If you've ever been into a startup office and they have a TV running with a bunch of charts and dashboards on it, it's likely a Gecko Board. I'd say about 50% chance it is. Another tool that's probably worth mentioning is Audience. So it allows for some very deep social media research. You can query huge amounts of Twitter profiles and Instagram profiles and LinkedIn profiles using this, basically searching for keywords and behaviors, the last time they logged in, following to follower ratios, metrics like that. So something to worth considering if you have a lot of social media marketing. Another tool that I consider essential, similar to Branch for mobile marketing, is App Annie. So effectively, this is Google Search Console for the app stores. It's very difficult to see behavioral habits and how people search and download in the App Store, and App Annie certainly does a better job than anyone else in terms of collecting this data. There are some other tools maybe worth looking at called Sensor Tower or Flurry that do similar things as well. And then some tools that actually combine a lot of these. So we certainly mentioned Google Analytics. Google Analytics actually has some pretty deep app tracking functionality. And so if you really don't have the development resource to set up something like Branch or set up an app-specific data tracking tool, Google Analytics can be a really, really good first solution to that. Mixpanel is also a very good all-in-one tool that allows for some basic analytics and dashboarding, some basic data collection and connection, decent attribution, as well as some basic marketing automation. However, I'd say Mixpanel is sort of one of those tools that's pretty good at everything but amazing at nothing. So if you are finding that you really want to get very, very powerful with marketing automation or setting up dashboards and analytics, Mixpanel probably isn't the tool for you, but it's a great start to building some of these initial solutions for you. Now, if you are finding that's not enough, tools like Domo or Exponia can be very, very good options. However, they are very expensive. They take a fair amount of configuration, but these are some of the tools that some very large enterprises are using to power marketing automation to millions of users, personalization at scale, as well as making it very, very easy to set up huge data systems. So a lot of this depends on how many users you have, and if you're B2B, these are likely not going to be tools for you. So now that we've gone through tools and how to start using data, let's look at how to not use data. So some things to remember when you're starting your initial analysis is data is contextual. It's not something that you can take and put into a different environment and expect to be able to draw the same conclusions. So what becomes really important here is starting to create a story with your data so that you have the context and you can describe it to other people so they don't misinterpret why that data is potentially different than what they think that is. So you can see on the right, we have a diagram where a couple have started tracking their relationship and it's gone downhill, and the woman thinks that that's probably the cause, is the fact that they're tracking it. Another thing to remember with data analytics is to really try and be objective. If you go into an analysis trying to draw a conclusion, you likely will find the data that allows you to draw it, and you likely will miss data that would probably pretty significantly invalidate what you're trying to do. it's usually best to start out with a viewpoint or a process called trying to disprove the null, which effectively means you should try and prove the opposite of what you want to prove. Because if you can't do that, then it might likely means that what you believe is true. It's easier to prove something than it is to disprove it. And another important factor to keep in mind is that correlation is not causality. This is where attribution becomes very, very important, because attribution lets you see causal relationships, not correlational relationships. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the chart at the left, as Nicolas Cage appears in more movies, more people drown in swimming pools. Now, that obviously probably is not related to each other, but if you don't look at the fact that these have nothing to do with each other, if you just looked at the charts, you might actually draw that conclusion. Just like you might say that, okay, I posted more to Facebook this month and we had more users come through and download our app. If you can't see that those users actually came through from Facebook using something like UTM links or some form of attribution, you can't actually draw that conclusion very confidently. Another important piece of information to keep in mind with this is that volume is power. The more people do a specific action, the larger your sample size, the easier it is to be confident in your conclusion. Now, you can see over to the right in the context of running an A/B test. So if we're going to have two different landing pages on a site and one has a green button and one has a red button, if we expect there to be a 10% or so difference between those groups, which would be pretty high if you think about just changing a color of a button, we would probably want to have about 1,000 users coming through that experiment to be able to have a decent confidence that that would work. I've also linked here a tool that allows you to just plug in a couple of numbers based off of how many users you potentially have and figure out how confident you can be statistically in your results from these experiments. And the last piece is to actually draw reasonable conclusions. So you can see we have a newlywed couple here who yesterday got married, and the man is concluding that, well, if you keep up your same rate of marriage, in probably 5 years, you're going to have a couple of thousand husbands. Now, obviously, that doesn't really make sense. But if you extrapolate data in a context where it doesn't make sense, you're going to find conclusions that don't make sense and potentially make decisions based off of them. So always really try and question the conclusions that you're drawing with data, because if you don't, you might find that you've built a major part of your business or a major strategy on something that actually doesn't really work. Thanks for joining us, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and enjoy the rest of the summit. Thanks very much.